Welcome back to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by grandtheftworld.com. It's April 17th, 2022. Who knows how to say it these days? How are the young people saying it? 2022 or 2022? Let me know in the Rockfin chat. All right, tonight we got a big show card. We got Google whistleblower Zach Voorhees coming on board.
There's a number of reasons why they're doing this. One is that AI is a reflection of big data. And what they want to do is that they want to basically censor the internet so that this big data doesn't go into this big AI that then turns around and has objective truth, because it turns out that objective truth is destabilizing to this like globalist network.
All right. So now, because you worked at Google and did that stuff, let me take the longer arc of history on this, and this will also aid the audience. Before you came on, we were talking about Zbigniew Brzezinski, and one of the things, so I'll start here. The financial aspects of the world that rule, they have intelligence agencies that watch out for people trying to catch on to them, right? And they do blackmail and some other things. In that infrastructure, you got a guy like Brzezinski, who's the Machiavelli of the day, helping the Medicis, United States government, Rockefellers. And he says, when the Stasi and Stalin, East Germany and USSR, when they're collecting all this data, they could collect all this data on people, but they lack the computing power to process it in real time to get this. Brzezinski says this in the 1970s, and then all of a sudden NSA starts tapping, but database development from Oracle, all this other stuff like goes off. So you see technology and surveillance growing, right? From there, you got signals intelligence, which our NSA is modeled on British GCHQ. So there's always been signals intelligence. And that's kind of what Google's in the middle of, Facebook's in the middle of, right? So they got the need to have signals intelligence to control people and get the drop on people, blackmail, influence, psychological warfare, all signals intelligence kind of processing. Now by the 2000s, they have that technology in place to actually do something with it, right? So around 2003, when I'm working at that AI company, they now have AI that can do learning on a given data set, not just IT infrastructure. If you point that out at the people, it's one heck of a surveillance type of AI engine, right? So now you would need what to train those learning algorithms? Massive amounts of people voluntarily just putting all their data up on their internet. How can we get them to do that? They said. And they had already taken LifeLog from DARPA, from the paymaster of Elon Musk, DARPA. They had the LifeLog. They closed it down. They say, Zuckerberg, you want to be Caesar with that haircut? We'll make you a Caesar. Here you go. Have at it. And here he is, today, still Meta. Facebook in it, right? Larry Ellison, who took over Oracle for the CIA project called Oracle, where they created the database to capture the brain of James Hesus Angleton before his dementia got the best of all that CIA secrecy. They needed an electronic filing cabinet. That's where the relational database was created. And the guy I worked for, Earl Cox, at that company, worked on that project with those guys back in the 60s. And his only difference was he thought they should use object-oriented databases. And they're like, get out of here. We're doing the relational database. But Oracle, the multi-billion-dollar company today, started back as a Department of Defense CIA project. And Angleton was the Oracle. So there's like tech history, political history, but the goal is to gather information on people, to collect it, to then process it so they can use it in real time to control our behavior. And along that way, if they can get us to assume that the disinformation is true, they've already won the battle, because the battle is us questioning and scrutinizing this information, using critical thinking, creative problem solving, talking freely amongst each other to have a republic that still resembles freedom. What they're trying to do is a zero-sum game of communism, collectivism. It's the loss of individual rights, liberty, all the philosophical
technocracy.
Freedom. Yeah, but it's more than that. It's technocracy, transhumanism, cybernetics. It's full spectrum dominance. And there's a lot of good research to flesh that out.
And one of the scary things about it is the fact that why will the elites need humans around in the future? Because
that's something Yuval Harari's been talking about.
Is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance. If we want to stop this epidemic, we need not just to monitor people, we need to monitor what's happening under their skin. What we have seen so far is corporations and governments collecting data about where we go, who we meet, what movies we watch. The next phase is the surveillance going under our skin. We're now seeing mass surveillance systems established even in democratic countries, which previously rejected them. And we also see a change in the nature of surveillance. Previously, surveillance was mainly above the skin. Now it's going under the skin. Governments want to know not just where we go or who we meet. Above all, they want to know what is happening under our skin. What's our body temperature? What's our blood pressure? What is our medical condition? Now humans are developing even bigger powers than ever before. We are really acquiring divine powers of creation and destruction. We are really upgrading humans into gods. We are acquiring, for instance, the power to re-engineer life. I know that in recent years, we saw populist politicians undermining deliberately the trust that people have in important institutions like universities, like respectable media outlets. These populist politicians told people that, say, scientists are this small elite, disconnected from the real people. I mean, all this story about Jesus rising from the dead and being the Son of God, this is fake news. Humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over.
Between now and then, we're going to do a deep dive into the past week's news. Stories like Elon Musk didn't just buy part of Twitter. He makes a kind of an offer for a hostile takeover. Twitter execs are taking a poison pill. A whole lot of things shaking out in that situation.
My strong intuitive sense is that having a public platform that is maximally trusted and broadly inclusive is extremely important to the future of civilization.
And it's been argued that this is the greatest political event since the election of 2020 and maybe for decades to come, right? This has big implications.
You tweet a lot.
I use my tweets to express myself.
He's used Twitter as a troll to go after people. He's used Twitter to talk up his own investments in things like cryptocurrencies.
Elon Musk has launched an audacious $43 billion takeover bid for Twitter.
He says he wants to pay $54.20 a share to buy up the rest of Twitter that he doesn't have.
I think it's very important for there to be an inclusive arena for free speech.
So Elon Musk understands something about Twitter that many people in our country don't understand, which is it is the single most important forum for speech possibly in the world. Not because it's the biggest, but because it's where elite opinion is incubated.
I am frightened by the impact on society and politics if Elon Musk acquires Twitter. He seems to believe that on social media, anything goes. For democracy to survive, we need more content moderation, not less.
But there are massive life and globe altering consequences for just letting people run wild on the thing.
As he put it on Twitter last month, quote, free speech is essential to a functioning democracy.
The entire regime depends on holding a total monopoly over what Elon rightly calls the global public square.
Our role is not to be bound by the First Amendment, but our role is to serve a healthy public conversation. And our moves are reflective of things that we believe lead to a healthier public conversation. The kinds of things that we do to work about this is to focus less on thinking about free speech, but thinking about how the times have changed.
Like, freedom of speech is fundamental.
That's what a super villain hero would say, right? He thinks he's Tony Stark, right? That's what they'd say. However you feel about him.
Well, we are seeing a digital revolution, and a real digital revolution, staged by a man who was told by the world that he couldn't achieve his dreams, and yet he's done it twice, doing his SpaceX program and his Tesla electric vehicles, and he's become the richest man on earth, defying public opinion.
I think he'll make a deal go through, whether it's this one or he takes over the company. He only needs 30-40% to have effective control, and I think he's in it enough to do it. And those who say, oh, how can he do Twitter when he's doing all this other stuff? What he's done is amazing. You take what he's done in rocketry. His company has better technology than any other government agency or company in the world in that area. So the guy's able to do these things. So one way or the other, he will get control of Twitter.
The news everywhere is Elon Musk is here to save the internet. He's here to save the whole shebango, guys. He's going to do it. He wants a hostile takeover. Oh, yeah. If you are an Elon Musk fanboy, and I've been fighting a lot of people online, people can't believe it. All over. They want to make the argument that Elon is a good guy and that this isn't the orchestration of the next savior that people need. Elon Musk and his operations are Trojan horse civilian systems for the military-industrial complex. And those aren't big words, and that's not convoluted. His money comes from contracts with weapon systems, in most cases, we can't imagine. That's where the moolah comes from. That's where the dollar bills are flying, folks. So you got this guy. Again, we're going to show you how he increases wealth 600% during this thing. Do you see a lot more Teslas? Did people have the cash to strap out for Teslas during COVID 1984? Where did he get all his money? Where did he get all his money? SpaceX, military-industrial complex, blackjack, Starlink. You better believe it, brother.
And then the next situation that we're going to cover this week is there was protests in LA against the mandates. There was particularly a clip by Kim Iverson that stood out. There's a lot of people coming together, even though people think COVID might have gone away. Behind the scenes, these mandates are still going forward. All these rules, the virtual pass, all these things are still moving forward.
Now, many of you might be thinking, COVID is over. People have moved on with their lives. We're now mask free, going back to bars, restaurants, gyms, work. Everything is back to normal. So why would anyone, let alone thousands, attend an anti-mandate rally? What mandates? Although many of us have gone back to what seems like our regular lives, the reality is there are still quite a few significant mandates in place and more being proposed by various state legislatures. For example, you still can't enter the United States if you're not an American citizen and you're unvaccinated. Previous infection doesn't count like it does in Europe. This means millions of Europeans who've had COVID passports due to having recovered from COVID in countries like France cannot enter the United States unless they get the vaccine. On top of this, numerous vaccines that are being offered in other countries are not accepted in the U.S. The Cuban-made vaccine, which is being widely used in South America, doesn't count. Nor does the Russian vaccine, which is nearly identical to AstraZeneca. This is keeping a number of families separated. Another mandate still around, over 1,000 colleges and universities require in-person students to be fully vaccinated against COVID, despite the fact young people have never been at risk of severe outcomes. The question then becomes, what do they consider to be fully vaccinated? Well, believe it or not, many universities are now requiring 3 doses, and some are even starting to require the 4th. Last Thursday, in a 2-to-1 vote, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals actually revived Biden's vaccine mandate for all federal executive branch employees. The appellate court ruled that the lower court didn't have the jurisdiction to put the stay on the mandate. The reason they upheld it had actually nothing to do with the actual mandate itself. They just ruled that the lower court didn't have the authority and that the employees challenging the mandate have to use proper legal channels set up for them. But regardless of this being a procedural hurdle, as of right now, the mandate is once again active. Now, what's even crazier is that on top of these existing mandates that don't seem to be going away, governments are actually trying to implement new ones. Here in California, where I live, there is a law being proposed that would require all California employees and contractors to be fully vaccinated. Every working man, woman, and child would have to be vaccinated or lose their job in the state of California. Ironically, retired people, the people most at risk of a severe COVID outcome, wouldn't even be subjected to this requirement. It makes no sense at all. Another bill would require the COVID-19 vaccine for all public and private school children, regardless of whether or not the vaccine gets full FDA approval, if you can believe it or not. On top of this, they actually want to lower the age of vaccine consent to 12, meaning kids can decide without parental consent or knowledge to get the vaccine. Another alarming bill being proposed in California includes the creation of a state immunization tracking system, giving government agencies access to everyone's vaccine records. State lawmakers also want to ban doctors from giving any other opinion on COVID than the state-sanctioned one, or else they face discipline by the medical board. And another bill takes a step further and actually proposes to ban any person or entity from saying anything the government deems to be untrue. Lastly, if you think law enforcement is going to look the other way, think again. Another proposed bill requires law enforcement to enforce these laws or lose their funding. So you can see we're still not out of the woods. Many people are still very much affected by vaccine mandates and other draconian measures, even though it's now fairly well known that the vaccine doesn't stop the spread. It doesn't seem to matter. It's no longer about science. It's clearly political.
And then last but not least, we've got a Paul Joseph Watson clip to kick it off tonight. This is the Summit News sweatshirt that I'm wearing. Let's go to Paul Joseph Watson for tonight's kickoff, and then stick around for the show.
So I was watching a documentary on ITV last night, and this came on during the commercials.
We're doing something different on News at 10 tonight. Join us for a forensic examination of Russian war crimes in Ukraine.
So the news broadcast isn't doing news. They admit they're doing something else. What could that possibly be? This is the literal definition of propaganda from the Cambridge English Dictionary. Information, ideas, opinions, or images, often only giving one part of an argument that are broadcast, published, or in some other way spread with the intention of influencing people's opinions. Now, I went on to watch some of the news broadcast in question, and during their investigations into war crimes being committed in Ukraine, did they even mention the horrific video of Ukrainian soldiers torturing Russian prisoners of war? Did they even mention the New York Times verified video showing wounded and hogtied Russian prisoners of war being executed by Ukrainians near Bucha? No. Hardly an impartial investigation into war crimes then, was it? It was in fact pure propaganda. And they admitted straight to your face what they were doing.
We're doing something different on News at 10 tonight.
Now let's be clear, I'm not even saying they're lying. I'm not saying that the Russians haven't committed war crimes. And the very definition of propaganda doesn't explicitly mean lying, but it does mean presenting only one side of an argument. And that's precisely what ITN did, which last time I checked is not supposed to be what the news does.
Yamiche just said is what I hear from all the Trump supporters that I talk to who were Trump voters and are still Trump supporters. They go, yeah, you guys are going crazy. He's doing, what are you so surprised about? He's doing exactly what he said he's going to do.
Well, and I think that the dangerous, edges here are that he's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts. And it could be that while unemployment and the economy worsens, he could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think. And that is our job.
Yeah. Now they're so arrogant and reckless, they'll openly admit what they're doing is propaganda by the literal definition of propaganda, before delivering that propaganda to a viewing audience of millions.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happen. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.